Before the universe knew light, it knew silence. A silence so complete it cannot be imagined, for there were no ears to hear, no atoms to move, no distance for sound to travel. There was only a vast, unlit potential, an ocean without waves, a presence without form. It was the long night before creation, when existence itself was still deciding whether to be. In this endless stillness, the laws of physics rested like seeds beneath frozen ground, waiting for the first spark of awakening. In that primordial darkness, there was no direction, no meaning, no time as we understand it. There was only density, heat, and confinement, a universe so compact that space and time curled into one another, indistinguishable, undefined. Yet even in that infinite compression, something subtle stirred. Patterns began to whisper within the chaos, and the fabric of reality, once perfectly uniform, began to shiver. Those tremors were not noise, they were possibility forming shape. They were the earliest breath of what would one day become galaxies, oceans, and eyes that could perceive beauty. If we could stand within that pre-creation night, we would not see darkness in the way our minds imagine it. There was no black, no absence, for color itself had not yet been born. There was only the purity of unmanifest energy, an invisible potential humming with what might come. Every photon that would ever exist, every atom that would ever form a mountain, every cell that would ever dream of love, slept quietly within that hidden sea. The future was folded upon itself, dreaming of its own awakening. The long night was not empty, it was waiting. Waiting as soil waits for rain. Waiting as the sky before dawn waits for the first shade of gold. In that patient stillness, the universe gathered strength, silently composing the laws that would govern all things. Gravity, electromagnetism, the nuclear forces, all lay dormant, suspended in equilibrium. But even perfection cannot last forever. Perfection must change, and in its change, creation begins. So the stillness began to tremble, and from that trembling, the first irreversible act of becoming took place. Scientists call this beginning the Big Bang, but the word bang is a misunderstanding. There was no explosion, no burst into pre-existing space. Space itself unfolded, stretching from a point smaller than imagination, filling with light that could not yet escape. It was not an event that happened in time, it was the birth of time itself. And in that newborn flow of seconds, the great darkness began to thin. For the first time, there was motion, temperature, radiation, a faint echo of what would one day become dawn. In those early moments, the universe was opaque, a fog of energy so dense that light could not travel far before colliding with matter. Every particle was bound in a restless dance, scattering, colliding, reforming. It was an orchestra without a conductor, yet somehow, in its chaos, harmony began to emerge. The temperature fell, the particles slowed, and like the first deep breath after panic, the cosmos began to expand calmly, rhythmically, outward into infinity. The long night was ending, though no one yet existed to see it. But before light could shine freely, it had to wait through hundreds of millions of years of darkness, an age so vast that it dwarfs all of human history a millionfold. This was the true night of creation, an epoch of silence after the storm, when the universe cooled enough for atoms to form, but not yet enough for stars to ignite. It was a night without contrast, where hydrogen and helium drifted invisibly, like the faint breath of a sleeper. And yet, within this stillness, destiny was taking shape. Invisible ripples of gravity began to gather matter into invisible clusters, the faint architecture of galaxies that would one day shimmer like jewels. It is tempting to think of this era as absence, but it was, in truth, the most profound fullness the cosmos would ever know. It contained everything, every future mountain, every symphony, every dream. All things existed there in their purest possibility. The darkness was not an enemy of light, it was its cradle. It was the mother of radiance, the womb of all beginnings. The first dawn would not have meaning without this sacred stillness that came before it. If one listens quietly enough, one can still hear that original night echoing beneath all things, the background radiation, the cosmic hum that fills every inch of space. It is a memory of when the universe was young and lightless, before the stars had names, before any being had opened its eyes. It is a whisper reminding us that every emergence requires a waiting, that creation is not a sudden act, but a slow unfolding from silence to sound, from sleep to awakening, from darkness to dawn. The long night before creation was not a void to escape, it was the beginning of all things. Just as every night contains the promise of morning, the cosmos held within its depths the inevitability of light. From that infinite hush, the first dawn was already destined. It only needed time to find its way.
Light was not born gently. It erupted, not as a beam or a ray, but as a transformation of the universe itself, a shift from blindness to vision, from heat to radiance, from chaos to coherence. The moment is called recombination, though the word sounds too calm for what it truly was. For nearly 400,000 years after the Big Bang, the universe had been a storm of charged particles, a restless sea where photons, the seeds of light, were trapped in endless collisions. The cosmos glowed, but no light could escape. It was like a lantern whose glass was made of fog, luminous, but blind to its own brilliance. Then, slowly, the storm cooled. The relentless collisions softened. Protons and electrons, weary from the chaos, found each other and bound together as hydrogen atoms. For the first time, the universe became transparent. The fog lifted. Light was freed. The photons, once imprisoned in plasma, could finally travel unhindered, stretching outward through space in every direction. That light still moves today. It is the oldest we can see, the faint afterglow we call the cosmic microwave background. Every photon from that moment carries the memory of the first dawn. If one could stand at that threshold, one would witness not a sunrise over a horizon, but the horizon itself becoming visible. Before this, there were no forms, no distances, no color, only density and fluctuation. But when light broke free, it revealed the cosmos to itself. For the first time, the universe could see. The very concept of sight began here, long before eyes evolved to witness it. It was an awakening of the cosmos, matter perceiving its own vastness through the medium of illumination. The first dawn was not a moment on a single world. It was the unveiling of existence across all space. In that radiance, the universe began to calm. The temperature fell to about 3,000 degrees, a warmth comparable to the surface of a red star. The once turbulent plasma cooled into clarity, and light, released at last, carried the imprint of every fluctuation, every whisper of density. These patterns, invisible yet precise, would determine the fate of everything, where galaxies would form, where stars would ignite, where planets and life would someday arise. The first light was not just illumination, it was information, written in the fabric of space-time itself. It is strange to think that this earliest light still touches us. It is not some distant echo, it is here, now, filling every room, every sky, every shadow. When we look into the dark between stars, we are gazing at that ancient light stretched thin by the expansion of the cosmos. It has cooled over billions of years, its color shifted from fiery orange to a faint, invisible microwave glow. Yet it endures, a soft whisper of the universe's first awakening, a cosmic memory that hums gently through all existence. We are, in a quiet way, still living inside that first dawn. This birth of light did not bring order immediately. The universe remained dim for a long age, a twilight stretching millions of years, before stars were born to rekindle the glow. But something had changed forever: transparency. The fog had cleared, and with it came the potential for structure. Tiny ripples of matter could now gather and coalesce. Gravity, once drowned in radiation, began to weave its slow magic, pulling atoms together across vast distances. The stage was set for the second act of creation, the birth of stars, the forges of all future light. From a philosophical view, this first dawn is more than physics. It is a symbol of awakening itself. Every being, every mind, every world experiences this pattern in its own form. There is always a moment when confusion gives way to clarity, when the fog of unknowing lifts, and awareness begins to shine. The universe, in its infancy, went through the same process we all repeat within our lifetimes. The cosmos learned to see long before we did, and we are merely echoes of that ancient vision. Light in this sense is not only energy, it is consciousness made visible. It defines contrast, reveals form, allows recognition. Without it, there is no difference between one thing and another, no concept of existence at all. Before light, everything was potential. After light, everything became distinct. It is as if the universe took its first breath, exhaled a sigh of illumination, and began to dream with open eyes. The separation between night and day, between known and unknown, began here, in that timeless instant when photons first escaped their prison. And yet, the universe did not create light alone. It became light. Every particle, every atom, carries within it the memory of that transformation. Every sunrise on every world is a reenactment of this moment. When morning breaks on Earth and the sky shifts from black to gold, it is not merely our planet turning toward the sun. It is the cosmos remembering itself, repeating the pattern of its first awakening. The same law that freed the photons then still rules the dance of daylight now. The first dawn was not a beginning and an end. It was a transition. It marked the end of pure potential and the beginning of differentiation, the first contrast in a universe that had known only sameness. Through that contrast, meaning became possible. Darkness and light became two halves of one eternal rhythm. Every story, every consciousness, every heartbeat traces its lineage back to that equilibrium broken, that harmony of opposites born in radiance. If you could listen closely to the silence between stars, you might still hear the echo of that release, the hum of light stretching across time. It is not a song that ends. It is a note sustained forever. The first dawn has never truly faded. It has only expanded, softened, become part of the fabric of all we are. Every beam of sunlight, every flicker of thought, every shimmer of reflection is its descendant. We are all, in some quiet way, still living in the glow of that first light, the light that changed the fate of everything. The universe waited in darkness for hundreds of millions of years after the first light escaped. The photons from the great recombination still drifted, but no new brilliance had yet emerged. Space was vast, cool, and silent, a cosmic dusk suspended between the memory of light and the promise of flame. But slowly, gravity began to weave its invisible threads. Within the endless hydrogen fog, tiny fluctuations, mere whispers of density, started to draw matter together. The stillness trembled. The long night began to fracture. The universe, once transparent and cold, was preparing to ignite. In the heart of those growing clouds, atoms pressed closer, drawn by an invisible pull stronger than their resistance. It was a slow, patient gathering, a billion-year inhale. Hydrogen, the simplest and most abundant element, was drawn into invisible knots. Every collision released a spark of heat. Every compression brought atoms nearer to the edge of transformation. What began as faint wisps of gas became swirling cradles of fire. The first stars were being born. They were small by our standards, fragile and fleeting, but their arrival marked the universe's second dawn, the moment the cosmos learned to burn. To understand what this meant, imagine the first candle in an infinite night. When fusion began in the heart of a collapsing cloud, the hydrogen within it fused into helium, releasing energy that pushed outward against gravity's relentless pull. For the first time, balance was achieved. The inward fall of matter met the outward pressure of light. From that equilibrium came radiance, heat, and the birth of structure. These stars were the universe's first creators, forging the elements that would one day become everything: carbon, oxygen, iron, and gold. The fire within them would scatter across eternity, enriching the void with the building blocks of life. They were not like the stars we see now. They were giants, hundreds of times more massive than the sun, burning fiercely and dying young. Their lives lasted only a few million years, a blink compared to the cosmic scale. But their deaths were spectacular. When they exhausted their fuel, they collapsed inward and exploded outward in titanic bursts of brilliance. These supernovae painted the darkness with light and seeded the cosmos with heavier elements. From their ashes, new stars formed, smaller and more stable, carrying within them the remnants of their fiery ancestors. Thus began the great cycle of birth, death, and renewal, the heartbeat of the universe. It is difficult to grasp the magnitude of this transformation. Before these stars, the universe was uniform, a smooth expanse of hydrogen and helium. After them, it was filled with diversity, with color and complexity. Light began to carve shapes into the void. The first galaxies gathered around clusters of stars, their gravity pulling them into spirals and spheres. The universe took on texture, like frost patterns forming on glass. For the first time, there was contrast, points of brilliance surrounded by darkness, energy framed by silence. The night was no longer endless. It had become alive. Every star that shines today is a descendant of those first luminous pioneers. When we gaze at the sky, we are not looking at distant objects, but at echoes of that original awakening. The light that reaches our eyes has traveled across unimaginable distances, carrying the memory of when the universe discovered how to shine. Even the atoms within our own bodies were once part of that radiant cycle. The carbon in our cells, the iron in our blood, the calcium in our bones, all were forged in stellar cores billions of years ago. We are, in the most literal sense, children of stars, fragments of ancient fire, given thought and breath. But beyond the science lies a deeper, quieter truth. The birth of stars is not just a physical event. It is a metaphor for emergence itself. Out of pressure, light is born. Out of collapse, balance arises. The stars are proof that destruction and creation are the same act seen from different directions. The immense weight that could have crushed them instead ignited them. In that paradox lies a lesson for all existence. Sometimes, only under the greatest pressure does radiance appear. The first stars were not born in ease. They were born in struggle, their brilliance the direct result of their gravity's embrace. In their light, the cosmos found rhythm. Energy began to flow, temperatures stabilized, and chemical reactions grew more intricate. The interstellar medium, the space between stars, became enriched with possibilities. Dust formed from stellar remnants, tiny grains of matter that would one day coalesce into planets. The first heavy elements, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, drifted like pollen across the galaxy, carried by winds of light. The universe had begun its great act of alchemy, turning fire into form, energy into existence, chaos into beauty. It is humbling to think that this all began from simplicity. One element, one law, one patient force of gravity. There were no architects, no plans, only the quiet unfolding of inevitability. The first dawn of starlight was not commanded, it was discovered. In the endless darkness, hydrogen simply did what hydrogen does. It gathered, it fell, it fused. And in that simple act, the universe learned to illuminate itself. The cosmos did not need eyes to see, it became the sight. When we look up at night, we often feel small beneath the immensity of the stars. But in truth, those stars are not above us. They are within us. Their light is the same light that flows through every living thing. The atoms that once danced in those early furnaces now pulse in our veins. The brilliance that once filled the first galaxies now glimmers behind our thoughts. The universe that learned to burn billions of years ago still burns through us, endlessly repeating the same truth. Light does not end when it fades. It transforms, it continues, it returns. So when the first stars learned to burn, the universe crossed an invisible threshold. It moved from mere existence to expression, from potential to art. The night was no longer empty. It was alive with the shimmer of countless suns, each a story unfolding in flame. The cosmos, for the first time, had a heartbeat. And in that pulse of light, the fate of everything yet to come, worlds, oceans, and life itself, was quietly set in motion. When the first stars began to shine, they brought with them a revolution. Their light and their deaths reshaped the very fabric of the universe. The darkness that had stretched endlessly began to glow faintly, scattered with the embers of starlight. Clouds of hydrogen and helium, once cold and empty, were now warmed, ionized, and transformed by radiation. The cosmos, once a quiet expanse of formless gas, began to shimmer with the first structures, filaments of light tracing the skeleton of what would one day become galaxies. The dawn of worlds had begun, though no planet yet existed to greet it. In those first star clusters, gravity worked like a sculptor. The immense forces of stellar birth and death created turbulence, shaping the gas around them into spirals, disks, and knots. Each dying star left behind ashes, heavy elements like carbon, oxygen, silicon, and iron, scattered into the interstellar medium. Those elements were rare and precious. They were the dust of possibility. Over time, this dust gathered again under the pull of gravity, forming denser and denser clouds. Within these clouds, new stars were born, now surrounded by disks of matter that would one day condense into planets. The first worlds were forming, tiny fragments of the cosmos learning how to hold themselves together. To imagine this age is to picture an ocean of creation, stars blazing, collapsing, and reforming in an endless cycle. Around some of these young suns, swirling rings of dust and gas spun in slow, elegant spirals. Within them, microscopic grains collided gently at first, then with growing insistence. They clung together through static forces and gravity, growing from dust to pebbles, from pebbles to boulders, from boulders to worlds. These collisions, violent and constant, were the birth pangs of the first planets. Each impact released heat, melting rock, vaporizing metals, fusing fragments into solid spheres. In the darkness, the first worlds were glowing, not from reflected light, but from their own creation's fire. No two of these early worlds were the same. Some were scorched and barren, too close to their young stars. Others were distant and frozen, silent and blue. Some grew massive enough to capture thick blankets of gas, becoming the first giants. Others remained small and rocky, their surfaces scarred by the violence of birth. But whether hot or cold, luminous or dark, each world was a new possibility, a stage upon which chemistry could one day awaken into life. The universe was no longer a blank page. It had landscapes, mountains, and skies, even if no eyes yet existed to see them. The dawn of worlds was also the dawn of time as we understand it. Before planets, there was only the endless rhythm of cosmic expansion. With planets came rotation, orbit, and the measure of days. The dance between light and darkness gained a new dimension, the turning of spheres beneath their stars. The first sunrises began here, not on Earth, but on ancient worlds long forgotten. Imagine those skies, molten horizons glowing under alien constellations, meteor storms illuminating vast oceans of magma. On some, the light of 3 or 4 suns might have crossed the sky together, their orbits weaving intricate patterns of shadow and flame. On others, endless night reigned, lit only by the faint reflection of distant starlight. Each world was a new verse in the cosmic poem of dawn. From a scientific view, this era marked the true transformation of the universe from energy to form. For the first time, matter had structure, purpose, and endurance. Worlds were not ephemeral. They persisted, endured, evolved. Gravity held them in orbits, preserving them across eons. The dust between stars no longer drifted aimlessly. It had become architecture. Through the quiet persistence of natural law, the universe had turned abstract possibility into tangible existence. It was as if the cosmos had begun to solidify its own dreams. Philosophically, the dawn of worlds represents the first act of permanence, the moment when impermanence began to give rise to continuity. The stars had burned brightly, but briefly. Worlds, on the other hand, could last billions of years. They were patient witnesses to the universe's unfolding, repositories of memory written in stone and ice. In their silence, they embodied endurance. And perhaps even before life, this endurance was the first form of meaning, the first resistance to entropy, the first gesture of persistence against the infinite night. These early planets, forged from the remains of dying stars, were cradles waiting for light. Their existence was a quiet promise that complexity could rise again and again. For every world destroyed by collision, a new one formed in its place. Creation was not a single event. It was rhythm, a repetition of becoming. In time, this rhythm would give rise to worlds that could host oceans, atmospheres, and the delicate chemistry of life. But even before that miracle, there was beauty, the poetry of gravity weaving substance into form, the cosmic art of light shaping matter. When the first starlight fell upon these newborn planets, it painted their barren surfaces with shadows and brilliance. For the first time, light had something to illuminate. The great contrast between night and day was born. The interplay of illumination and darkness, once purely cosmic, became planetary, intimate, personal. It is the same rhythm that still governs our days and nights, our sleep and waking, our life and death. The first dawns on those worlds were silent, but they set a pattern that every sunrise since has followed. The eternal return of light after shadow. Even now, scattered across the universe, countless worlds continue to form. Around distant suns, the same dance repeats. Dust to stone, stone to sphere, sphere to home. The process is not ancient history. It is happening in this very moment, light years away, unseen yet certain. The dawn of worlds never truly ended. It continues endlessly, like the breath of the cosmos itself. Every world that turns beneath a star is part of that same unfolding story, begun billions of years ago, when the universe first learned how to make form out of fire. The first worlds were not alive, but they were the beginning of the possibility of life. They were seeds in the soil of space, waiting for the right warmth, the right distance, the right chemistry. They were the silent prelude to all that would follow, the forests, the oceans, the cities, and the minds that would one day look back and wonder where it all began. And in that wondering, we complete the circle, for we are the universe remembering itself. The dawn of worlds was not only their beginning, it was ours, waiting patiently in the dark for consciousness to arise and give it meaning. Earth's first morning was not gentle. It was not a soft sunrise spilling light across quiet oceans. It was violent, molten, and loud, a young world trembling under the weight of creation. Before there were blue skies or calm seas, Earth was a sphere of glowing rock wrapped in choking gases, its surface seething with volcanic fire. Comets and asteroids rained endlessly from the sky, carrying both destruction and the seeds of water. Every impact reshaped the planet, heating it, stirring it, and laying the foundations for what would one day become home. And yet, beneath all this chaos, something remarkable was happening. Order was slowly emerging from fire. The world was cooling, and in that cooling, dawn was being prepared. Billions of years ago, when our planet was still young, it spun faster than it does today. A single day lasted only a few hours, and each sunrise followed the last in quick succession. The sun itself was dimmer, weaker than the star we know, but its light was fierce against the haze that shrouded the sky. The air was thick with carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur, gases that would choke life today, but once served as a protective veil, holding warmth to a still cooling world. Volcanoes roared across the continents that did not yet exist, pouring rivers of fire into newborn oceans. Lightning flashed across dark clouds, illuminating the steam that rose from boiling seas. This was Earth's first morning, a dawn without peace, a beginning born from struggle. And yet it was light. For the first time, sunlight touched solid ground. Before this, Earth's skies had been veiled by vapor and dust, blocking the radiance of its star. But as the bombardment slowed and the atmosphere cleared, the first beams of light broke through. They scattered through clouds, refracted across molten plains, and danced on the rippling surfaces of primordial oceans. That sunlight did not just warm the young Earth, it began to define it. Shadows appeared where there had been none, and with them came the first sense of contrast, of form. The Earth had awakened to the presence of its own star. To imagine that first sunrise is to imagine the moment when the planet began to recognize itself. The light that reached the surface carried not only heat but memory. Photons that had traveled across 93 million miles, touching a world still deciding what it would become. The mountains were still young, the seas still raw, but light began to sculpt them. It struck the minerals, the dust, the waves, and turned them into mirrors. The planet, once hidden in darkness, now gleamed. In that reflection, the Earth became visible to the universe. But this dawn was more than a physical moment. It was chemical, biological, and spiritual all at once. Sunlight began to interact with the gases in the atmosphere, breaking molecules apart, triggering reactions that would one day give rise to life. Ultraviolet radiation, though dangerous, became a catalyst for complexity. Under its touch, simple compounds combined and recombined, forming amino acids, sugars, and the precursors of life's great alphabet. The same light that burned could also create. The first dawn on Earth was not only illumination, it was the first whisper of the living world. Beneath the seas, in the shadows of volcanic vents, reactions stirred that needed only stability to continue. Sunlight above and heat below worked in partnership, weaving the first molecular threads of what would one day call itself alive. Perhaps that light never reached those depths directly, but it guided the cycles that made them possible. The evaporation of water, the fall of rain, the movement of heat across a still young ocean. Even in darkness, the dawn was at work. It was not just an event in the sky. It was a transformation in the planet's very nature. Light had arrived, and everything was beginning to listen to it. The geological record still carries traces of that first morning. The oldest minerals, tiny crystals called zircons, bear within them the memory of sunlight's first kiss. They tell us that water was already present, that the crust had cooled enough to form continents, that the cycle of evaporation and condensation had begun. These are not just stones, they are fragments of dawn. Each one holds within it the proof that the light had found its way through the veil, touching the surface long before the first cell stirred. When we hold them today, we are holding the silence of that first sunrise. And yet, Earth's first dawn was not a singular event. It repeated day after day as the planet turned. Each sunrise burned through haze. Each sunset cooled the surface again. The rhythm of day and night began its eternal cycle, and in that rhythm, life found its first pattern. The alternation of light and dark became a heartbeat, a cosmic metronome by which all living things would later measure their time. Circadian rhythms, sleep and waking, growth and rest. All of these began here in the simple, endless turning of a newborn world before its star. Philosophically, this first dawn can be seen as the moment when potential became experience. Before it, the earth existed but did not feel. After it, light began to trace awareness across the surface of matter. Every reflection, every shadow, was an act of perception, a primitive echo of consciousness itself. Light, by revealing difference, gave birth to meaning. The earth began to carry within it a record of contrast, hot and cold, bright and dim, still and storming. The first dawn was, in a way, the beginning of memory. The planet began to keep time. It is easy to forget that dawn is not merely a daily occurrence, but a fundamental state of becoming. The first dawn on Earth is the archetype of all awakenings, physical, spiritual, and mental. It shows that illumination is not soft, not effortless. It comes through friction, through struggle, through the breaking of barriers. Light is born when matter yields, when the dense gives way to the radiant. In that sense, our own inner awakenings mirror that ancient event. We, too, emerge from chaos into clarity. Again and again, each dawn within us an echo of the first. As the early atmosphere thinned and the skies cleared, the color of light began to change. The once orange haze gave way to pale blue, scattered by oxygen molecules that were only just beginning to accumulate. That blue, fragile infinite was the first color of peace after billions of years of violence. The oceans reflected it, deepening it, amplifying it, until the planet shone as a world of water and light. The earth had entered its second age, no longer a world of fire, but a world of reflection. And so the first dawn on Earth was not simply the rising of the sun. It was the transformation of the planet from chaos to clarity, from hiddenness to openness. The same sunlight that had once scorched the barren rock now nurtured the first seas. What began as destruction became balance. The world that had once been fire became a mirror for the cosmos, calm enough to hold the image of the sky. Every sunrise since that day has been a remembrance of that transformation, a renewal of the covenant between light and matter, between the seen and the unseen. When dawn breaks now, it is not just the beginning of a new day. It is the continuation of the same story that began when the first light touched the first ocean, and the earth, for the very first time, opened its eyes. There was a time when the earth breathed in darkness, when the world's waters were still silent, and life had not yet spoken its first word. But deep beneath those ancient seas, something extraordinary began to stir, not by chance, but by the slow, patient choreography of sunlight and chemistry. The first dawn had not only illuminated the world above, it had awakened a deeper, unseen process below. In the calm after eons of fire, the surface of the planet cooled enough for the oceans to cradle new reactions, fragile, delicate, yet filled with potential. It was here, in the secret depths, that sunlight and shadow began their eternal dialogue, weaving the first threads of life from matter that once seemed lifeless. Imagine that ancient ocean, heavy with minerals, saturated with iron, carbon, and sulfur. Lightning flashed above it, and from volcanic vents rose clouds of hydrogen and methane. When sunlight met this mixture, it sparked chemical dances that had never occurred before. Simple molecules collided and merged, forming chains of carbon and nitrogen, amino acids and sugars. These were the first whispers of biology, arising from the language of physics. It was a language spoken not in words, but in bonds, the quiet joining and separating of atoms in rhythm with the pulse of light. The dawn, it seems, did not only rise upon the earth, it rose within it. The surface of the young seas shimmered beneath a pale orange sky. Sunlight, once too harsh to nurture, began to soften as the atmosphere thickened. Ultraviolet rays split apart molecules, creating energy that smaller structures could capture and use. Some of these molecules, the ancestors of chlorophyll and pigments that would one day paint the green of forests, began to absorb sunlight and hold its power within themselves. This was not yet photosynthesis, not yet the conscious conversion of light into life, but it was a beginning. The planet was learning how to keep the memory of the sun. In those ancient waters, surrounded by heat and lightning, the first chemical cycles began to sustain themselves. Molecules formed membranes, delicate bubbles that separated the inside from the outside. Within them, reactions could happen in order, with precision. Energy could be stored, shared, passed along. These tiny capsules of chemistry were the first true cells, though they would not have looked alive in any way we recognize. They were small, fragile, and blind, but they could divide. They could grow, and, in their growing, they could remember the light. When scientists today recreate these conditions in laboratories, mixing methane, ammonia, and water, then charging them with electric sparks, they watch similar reactions unfold. From the simplest ingredients come the precursors of life, as if the universe itself still remembers how to begin again. The same physics that once shaped the stars had found a way to create biology. Light, matter, and time were no longer separate. They had fused into a system capable of evolution. The first dawn had set something irreversible into motion. The earth would never again be just a rock beneath a star. It had become a cradle. It is humbling to think that everything we are, our thoughts, our dreams, the feeling of warmth on our skin when morning comes, all began in that microscopic oceanic symphony. The first light did not simply reveal the world. It taught matter how to see itself. Photons striking simple compounds set off a cascade of reactions that would one day allow eyes to form, nerves to sense, minds to reflect. Every act of perception is, in some distant way, an echo of that first awakening, when sunlight began to whisper to the molecules of the sea, "Remember me." The earliest organisms that emerged from those primeval waters were not creatures in the sense we know them. They did not move or think. They existed as patterns, repeating, adapting, refining themselves through countless cycles of light and darkness. Some of these early life forms may have used the sun's energy directly, absorbing light to power their reactions. Others depended on the warmth of the earth itself. But together, they began the long conversation between the living and the luminous, a dialogue that continues in every leaf, every cell, every heartbeat today. Over time, these early organisms began to change the world that had given birth to them. In learning to use sunlight, they released oxygen, a new and volatile presence in the atmosphere. Slowly, invisibly, the sky began to clear. The air that once smothered the earth with haze began to open to light. The first blue sky shimmered into existence because life had chosen to reach upward. In this way, dawn and life were bound together in a single breath. Light made life possible, and life, in turn, made light visible. The planet itself was evolving toward transparency. The story of that era is written not in fossils, but in the rocks. Bands of iron-rich stone, laid down on the seafloor billions of years ago, record the rise of oxygen, the signature of the first living sunlight. These ancient formations tell us that the planet itself was being transformed by its own children. The Earth, once purely geological, was becoming biological. Each sunrise became not just a return of light, but a pulse of renewal, a chance for the living to expand, to adapt, to continue the long experiment that began with a single reaction in a silent sea. Philosophically, this transformation was monumental. For the first time, the boundary between inert and alive was crossed. The universe had created something that could look back at it, respond to it, and eventually name it. The first dawn had not only illuminated a world, it had illuminated awareness. Even if that awareness took billions of years to mature, its seed was planted here, in the mingling of sunlight and water. From that seed grew the possibility of perception, emotion, memory, and meaning. It is astonishing to consider how fragile that balance was. A small change in temperature, a slightly different atmosphere, a few less rays of light, and the chemistry might never have taken hold. But it did. Against all odds, the first dawn did not merely shine. It created the conditions for the dawn within consciousness. The sun that rose over that ancient ocean was the same sun that rises today, carrying within its light the same power to awaken, to reveal, to give life. When we look toward the morning horizon, we are not only watching the present, we are seeing the continuation of the first miracle, the dawn that taught the earth to breathe. And so in the long rhythm of cosmic time, the first cells multiplied, the oceans grew thick with color, and light became the sculptor of destiny. Every form that would come after, every tree, every bird, every mind, would carry a memory of that first exchange between energy and existence. The dawn had changed the fate of everything, not through force, but through illumination. It had taught the universe how to live, how to see, how to become aware of itself. And in the stillness of each morning, as the first light touches the quiet earth, that lesson continues, ancient, delicate, eternal. Light had changed everything. It had written the first lines of life's story into the waters of a young world. But as time moved forward across millions, then billions of years, the sun's gentle rhythm began to shape not just chemistry, but time itself. The world began to learn the language of cycles, light and darkness, warmth and cold, rising and falling. These alternating states became the pulse of existence, and through them, life began to synchronize itself with the cosmos. The first dawn was no longer just a moment in history. It had become a pattern, a heartbeat that every living thing would one day inherit. In those ancient oceans, early organisms learned to move in tune with the light. When the sun rose, certain reactions quickened. When it set, they slowed or ceased. Cells began to store energy during the day and rest at night. In that simple adaptation, the rhythm of action and pause, was born the idea of time as the living experience of change. The alternation of day and night was not just an environmental condition, It was the first teacher, the first metronome guiding all of life. Each dawn became a signal, each dusk a promise of return. In learning the cycles of the sky, life had found a way to endure. This was the birth of the circadian rhythm, a quiet, universal law that governs all living things even today. Long before consciousness appeared, before thought or awareness, life had already learned to measure the passing of light. The rising sun signaled growth, motion, and energy. The setting sun brought repair, stillness, and renewal. Every cell carried this oscillation deep within it, a biological echo of that first dawn. It was as if the sun had written its rhythm directly into the code of life, ensuring that all beings would move, rest, and awaken according to its eternal dance. The Earth, too, participated in this grand rhythm. Its rotation slowed slightly over time, lengthening the days, allowing each sunrise and sunset to stretch across longer arcs of sky. As the planet spun, the ocean swelled and receded in tides, drawn not by the sun, but by the moon, Earth's quiet companion. Between them, light and gravity began to compose a duet, the daily rhythm of sunlight and the slower pulse of lunar tides. Together, they shaped the first coastlines, the first coral shelves, and perhaps the first migrations of life toward the shore. Dawn and dusk were no longer confined to the sky. They had entered the sea. To imagine that world is to imagine an Earth breathing in waves. Sunlight cascaded through the shallows, scattering into a golden haze that reached the seafloor. Microbes swam toward the light each morning, rising through the water to harvest energy. When night fell, they drifted back down into the dark. This daily ascent and descent, a journey no larger than a few meters, yet immense in its meaning, became the first movement of life across space and time. It was not instinct as we understand it, nor choice. It was rhythm, pure and ancient, guiding life before thought ever began. As these patterns continued, the living world began to develop memory, not memory as stored images, but as expectation. The return of the sun was no longer a surprise. It was a certainty written into the structure of being. Molecules began to anticipate the light before it came, preparing themselves, aligning their reactions to its approach. In this way, dawn became more than a physical event. It became a moment of trust. Life had learned to believe in the return of the sun. Each sunrise was a reassurance that the world would continue, that time had meaning. When multicellular life eventually appeared, the circadian rhythm grew more intricate. Creatures began to coordinate their internal worlds with the celestial one. Some bloomed only at dawn, others closed their petals at dusk. Some hunted under moonlight, while others hid until the safety of day. Sleep itself, that daily surrender to darkness, was the natural extension of the ancient pattern set in motion by the first dawn. The alternation between waking and sleeping is nothing less than the living embodiment of the turning earth. When we close our eyes each night, we are repeating a ritual written by the planet's earliest light. Scientists studying circadian rhythms today find the same fundamental cycle everywhere, in plants, fungi, insects, birds, and humans alike. It pulses in our DNA, in the proteins that rise and fall within our cells. It is as though the entire history of sunlight has been condensed into biology, a cosmic rhythm turned inward. Even in total darkness, away from the sun, this internal clock continues to tick, a faithful echo of the first dawn. Every heartbeat, every breath, every dream follows its music. We are, in essence, living metronomes of the cosmos. The philosophical weight of this is profound. It means that the boundary between cosmic time and human time does not truly exist. We do not merely observe dawn. We are dawn, recurring, cycling, renewing. Our waking each morning is not separate from the Earth's turning. It is the same gesture performed on a smaller scale. The planet spins, the sun rises, our consciousness opens, all part of the same unfolding. The first dawn did not simply happen long ago. It happens through us, again and again, in every moment of awareness. This rhythm, light to dark, chaos to rest, movement to stillness, is the foundation upon which all balance depends. Without it, there would be no measure of change, no sense of contrast. The very concept of time would dissolve. Dawn and dusk give shape to existence, defining not just when life can act, but what it means to be alive. To exist is to move between opposites, waking and dreaming, knowing and forgetting, being and becoming. The first dawn created the framework for all these dualities, the eternal return between light and shadow that gives life its meaning. And yet, within this cycle lies something more delicate, the art of surrender. Every evening, as darkness falls, life lets go. It ceases striving, trusting that light will return. That trust, ancient, instinctive, and complete, is perhaps the purest form of faith the universe has ever known. Before religion, before words, before thought itself, there was the rhythm of day and night, the assurance that after every descent into darkness, light would come again. Every dawn since then has been a renewal of that promise, a cosmic reassurance that no ending is final, and no shadow is permanent. In this way, the first dawn did more than create light. It created time, memory, and meaning. It taught the earth to breathe in cycles, to find peace in repetition, to build harmony from contrast. And somewhere in the depths of that ancient rhythm, carried through every living cell, every rising tide, every heartbeat that greets the morning, the universe learned something astonishing. It learned how to dream. The first dawn had given the world rhythm, and rhythm had given it life. Yet even as the sun continued its quiet devotion, another transformation began, one that would alter the very texture of the planet's being. Life, once bound to the sea, began to reach outward, to touch the light more directly. The oceans had long been a cradle, but now they became a mirror, reflecting the yearning of what lived within them. That yearning to rise, to see, to expand, would reshape not just the face of the earth, but the destiny of everything upon it. The world was preparing for its next awakening, the age when light would no longer simply fall upon life, but be captured, stored, and multiplied through the miracle of photosynthesis. Billions of years had passed since the first dawn, and yet the memory of that light still lingered in the chemistry of cells. Deep within the oceans, microscopic organisms, cyanobacteria, began to master the art of transforming sunlight into nourishment. It was an audacious act, one that defied the old ways of surviving through heat and minerals. These tiny architects discovered how to turn photons into fuel, weaving energy and matter together with divine precision. For the first time, light became not just a source of warmth or rhythm, but the very essence of sustenance. Life was learning how to feed directly from the sun. Through photosynthesis, cyanobacteria began to release oxygen as a byproduct. It seemed like a small thing, a faint gas exhaled into the water, but it would become one of the most powerful forces in Earth's history. Slowly, invisibly, oxygen began to accumulate in the oceans and then in the air. At first, it was toxic to many of the older anaerobic forms of life. Entire microbial empires vanished beneath its touch. The great oxygenation event was both creation and destruction, an apocalypse and a rebirth. Yet from this catastrophe emerged something unprecedented, a world capable of breathing. The skies began to change. The once orange haze that had cloaked the planet faded, replaced by the first clear blue atmosphere. Sunlight, no longer diffused through clouds of methane and sulfur, poured down upon the earth in full radiance. The seas sparkled. The continents gleamed. For the first time in the planet's history, light traveled from the sun to the surface and back again, unimpeded. The earth had become a mirror worthy of its star. And in that clarity, something poetic occurred. The planet began to see itself. With oxygen came color. Iron-rich waters oxidized into reds and browns. The sky turned azure. The oceans deepened to cobalt and green. Photosynthetic life painted the world, tinting the seas with blooms of emerald and jade. The first true landscapes of color emerged, long before the eye existed to behold them. It was as if the earth was practicing beauty before beauty had meaning, an unconscious art shaped by light and chemistry. Every hue, every shimmer, every gradient of sky and sea was a reflection of sunlight being interpreted by matter. In time, oxygen accumulated in such abundance that a new layer formed high above the planet, the ozone layer. It was a shield, born from the very process that created it, protecting life from the harshest rays of the sun. With that protection, the world grew calmer, safer. The once lethal light that had burned the early Earth now became a nurturing glow. The dawn had evolved, not just a rising of light, but a tempering of it. The sun, once feared, was now a companion. The relationship between light and life deepened further. As photosynthesis refined itself, the pace of planetary transformation accelerated. Oxygen reshaped the chemistry of the oceans, allowing complex molecules to thrive. Energy began to flow more efficiently through the web of existence. Cells developed mitochondria, specialized engines that transformed oxygen into power. With that innovation, the stage was set for multicellular life. The age of the single-celled was fading, and the age of the complex was dawning. It's humbling to consider that this transformation, this leap from simplicity to complexity, began with light. Every breath we take, every spark of thought in our brain, is powered by the same process that cyanobacteria discovered billions of years ago. The oxygen that fills our lungs is sunlight in disguise, transformed through time into the invisible architecture of life. We are, in a literal sense, breathing light. The dawn that once broke over an empty world is now inside us, burning softly in every heartbeat. But the story of oxygen is also a story of balance. Too much of it, and the world would ignite. Too little, and it would fade back into shadow. Life and light had to learn restraint, a lesson written into every ecosystem that followed. Forests, oceans, and atmosphere began to enter a delicate conversation, exhaling and inhaling across vast ages. This exchange became the planet's respiration, the slow and sacred rhythm that keeps it alive. The Earth had become a breathing organism, and dawn was its inhale. Philosophically, this age marked a new kind of awakening, not of matter or rhythm, but of interdependence. The light that once merely illuminated now circulated through the veins of life, uniting all beings in a single luminous thread. The same photons that touched a leaf also passed through an animal that ate it, and then into the air, into another form of life. Light became communion, a continuous offering, endlessly exchanged. Every living thing became a vessel of the same solar memory. Perhaps this is why dawn has always carried a sacred quality in human memory. Even before consciousness had evolved enough to give it meaning, the world already revered it in form. Each sunrise was an act of creation repeated, a renewal of the covenant between sun and earth. The light that first awakened the seas now awoke forests, mountains, and creatures who could feel its warmth. Dawn had expanded from a scientific phenomenon into a universal ritual, the quiet, daily resurrection of everything that exists. And yet, in its infinite patience, light asked for nothing in return. It simply gave. The photons that traveled across space to kiss the Earth did not demand survival or gratitude. They arrived without condition, and in their giving, life found purpose. The entire biosphere became an expression of that generosity, an ecosystem powered by gift alone. The first dawn had been an act of illumination. This one was an act of grace. To this day, every sunrise repeats that original offering. The light we see in the morning sky is ancient, born in the heart of the sun millions of years before it touches our eyes. It traveled through darkness, through space, through the fragile shield of our atmosphere, to arrive here, gentle, constant, familiar. It is a reminder that the dawn which once changed the fate of everything is not gone. It continues, moment by moment, in every ray that lands upon the earth, and in every breath that life takes in response. By the time light had filled the world with color, the earth had already learned to dream. It had known the darkness of birth, the chaos of fire, the slow rhythm of oceans, and the silent patience of stone. Now in this new age of balance, life began to stretch beyond survival, to express. Light had become the sculptor of form, the shaper of diversity, the painter of possibility. The dawn no longer revealed a barren world. It revealed movement, creatures swimming, crawling, breathing, sensing. The earth had awakened not only to light, but to perception. In the beginning, life's relationship with sunlight had been purely chemical, a quiet transaction of energy. But now something had shifted. Eyes began to appear in the simplest of forms. Light-sensitive patches on tiny organisms, subtle membranes that could distinguish brightness from dark. It was the universe's first attempt to see itself. Those primitive eyes, born of the ocean, responded to the same photons that had once sparked the chemistry of life. Light had taught the planet to feel. Now it was teaching it to witness. Each dawn brought with it new possibilities. In the soft shallows, organisms began to rise toward the surface. Following the sun's daily arc, coral reefs glowed with color. Fish learned to hide in shadow, to hunt by the glimmer of day. Plants unfurled themselves in rhythm with the morning, drawing energy from the same source that shaped their ancestors eons ago. Dawn had become a teacher of behavior. The world was learning the art of timing, of anticipation, of harmony. Light had become not just a force, but a guide. The Cambrian seas exploded with forms that had never existed before. Armor, fins, eyes, shells, all emerged under the instruction of light. For the first time, color became a language. Iridescent scales shimmered to attract mates or warn predators. Patterns formed, fractal and intricate, as nature discovered expression. This was no longer survival alone, it was communication, intention, even beauty. The dawn now revealed meaning written into the very fabric of life. It is humbling to imagine that beauty, that elusive, ineffable quality, may have its roots in sunlight. The pigments that give a butterfly its wings, the coral its glow, or a leaf its green, are all descendants of ancient molecules designed to capture light. What began as mere function became art. Life, illuminated by the dawn, began to reflect not only the sun, but the imagination of existence itself. Every color became a dialogue between energy and form, between the giver of light and the receiver. On land, new life was emerging, mosses and ferns that crept across the rocks, their roots drawing sustenance from soil enriched by ancient seas. The first forests were born, breathing out oxygen into skies that now shimmered blue and clear. Dawn in this new world was symphonic. The rustle of leaves, the first songs of insects, the shimmer of dew turning gold under the rising sunlight moved through these landscapes like a slow wave, awakening each leaf in turn. Every sunrise was not just a beginning. It was a remembering of the first dawn that made all others possible. Philosophically, this era represented a profound turning point. Until now, light had shaped life unconsciously, through chemistry and adaptation. But now, with the rise of perception and awareness, light began to shape experience. The dawn was no longer just illumination, it became emotion. Fear, wonder, awe, comfort, all emerged in relation to it. The first creatures that responded to sunrise were not only following warmth, they were responding to the call of meaning. Dawn had become the bridge between the physical and the spiritual. Even the earth's own body responded to light with a kind of quiet devotion. Flowers learned to open their petals only when the sun rose, closing again at dusk. Trees followed the sun's arc, turning their leaves to capture its energy most efficiently. The rhythm of dawn became an act of praise, wordless and continuous. Life had become ritual. In every forest and ocean, morning was a ceremony repeated with perfect grace, a collective breath of awakening that unified all beings. From a scientific perspective, this expansion of light's influence marked the dawn of ecosystems, complex interdependencies bound by the exchange of energy. Photosynthetic plants fed the herbivores, who fed the predators, who returned their essence to the soil. The same photons that entered a leaf at sunrise would pass through a chain of life before returning to the earth at night. Dawn had created not only individual beings, but the interwoven fabric of existence, a luminous web of cause and consequence. The more life diversified, the more complex its dance with light became. Some creatures began to live by shadow, evolving under the cover of night. Eyes adapted to darkness, sensing faint glimmers of starlight reflected from the moon. In this, the first duality of perception was born, day and night, light and darkness, sight and mystery. Dawn no longer marked a universal awakening. It became a transition, a handoff between two realms. The balance of light and shadow had found its rhythm, and the planet pulsed with its music. What began as pure energy had now become consciousness in its most delicate form. Life was no longer merely reacting to light. It was interpreting it, internalizing it, even yearning for it. The sun had become more than a star. It was a symbol of safety, warmth, and renewal. When dawn broke each morning, it reaffirmed the pattern that all living beings depended upon, the certainty that the world continues. In that certainty, the first traces of hope were born. Hope, after all, is a kind of light, invisible yet guiding. It is the belief that darkness is never final, that even after night, the morning will come. This ancient pattern, carved into every cell, lives within us still. Every time we awaken from sleep, every time we seek warmth or clarity, we are echoing that first instinct. The memory of the dawn is written into us as deeply as our breath. And so, as the world entered its age of flourishing, the first dawn's legacy deepened. It was no longer just the story of a planet illuminated. It was the story of perception itself. To see was to live, and to live was to remember the light. From the first shimmer of a microbial eye to the gaze of a human watching sunrise, the same truth endures. We are creatures of dawn, drawn ceaselessly toward the light that gave us birth. The earth had become a cathedral of illumination, every leaf a window, every wave a reflection, every eye a lens of memory. Dawn had transformed the planet from a place of survival into a place of awareness. Light had taught matter not only how to move, but how to feel. The journey that began with fire and darkness had reached a kind of transcendence. The earth was awake now fully, beautifully, eternally, watching itself through the eyes of all who looked upon the morning. As the world settled into its luminous rhythm, something remarkable began to stir within the quiet architecture of life. Among the vast web of creatures moved by the cycle of light and shadow, a new phenomenon began to emerge: memory. The dawn was no longer just a force to react to, but something to anticipate, to recall, to dream of an absence. The creatures of Earth, shaped by countless mornings, were beginning to internalize the rhythm of light itself. Dawn had left the sky and entered the mind. Each sunrise was now part of a longer pattern, the circadian rhythm, an invisible pulse that linked every living thing to the turning of the planet. From the simplest bacteria to the earliest vertebrates, life had developed internal clocks, biological metronomes that whispered when to wake, when to rest, when to bloom, when to hide. These rhythms were the inheritance of the first dawn, embedded in DNA, a genetic memory of the light that once broke the endless night. In plants, this rhythm dictated when flowers opened, when leaves tilted toward the sun, and when seeds slept beneath the soil. In animals, it became heartbeat and hunger, migration and reproduction, even mood and emotion. Dawn, once a singular event, had become the composer of time itself. Every moment in the natural world now existed in relation to light, its arrival, its departure, its promise of return. Life had begun to live by the memory of dawn. What had started as chemistry had become prophecy. Deep within cells, molecules known as cryptochromes and photoreceptors listened for faint changes in light, aligning the body's rhythm with the rising sun. Even in complete darkness, life could feel the Earth's rotation, predicting the moment of morning. The dance of day and night had carved its patterns so deeply that it continued to echo, even when light was absent. Dawn had become more than illumination. It was expectation, a biological faith in renewal. Imagine the first creature that waited for light. Long before the concept of waiting existed, it may have felt an ancient pull, a slow stirring as the horizon began to glow. It did not know the word morning, but its body did. It moved not in response to what it saw, but to what it knew would come. In that invisible moment between night and dawn, the first trace of anticipation flickered into being. That anticipation, that awareness of something unseen but imminent, was the earliest whisper of consciousness. The dawn taught life to remember, and through memory, to imagine. The creatures that followed the rhythm of the sun became synchronized with the turning of the earth, their lives shaped by the geometry of light. Migration routes mirrored the path of sunrise, breeding seasons aligned with day length. Sleep itself became an echo of the planetary cycle. Every creature, whether it knew it or not, carried the sun within its biology. The earth was now alive not just on its surface, but in its timing. There is a poetry in the way light continues to write itself into matter. Each of us carries in our blood the same circadian rhythm that guided the first living cells billions of years ago. When we wake to morning light, our eyes send signals deep into the brain, to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the seat of our biological clock. Hormones shift, temperature rises, awareness blooms. Dawn reaches through the atmosphere, through the eyes, into the core of consciousness. It is not merely an external event. It is an internal sunrise. The rhythm of light governs emotion as much as biology. In the presence of dawn, serotonin rises, the chemical of calm and contentment. With nightfall, melatonin begins its song, inviting rest. Our moods, our dreams, even our creativity are entwined with the sun cycle. This ancient choreography, born in the earliest forms of life, still dictates our being. The light that once animated simple cells now animates thought, memory, and imagination. The dawn that shaped the world continues to shape the soul. But with rhythm comes contrast. The first dawns also introduced the concept of absence, the experience of night as something more than darkness. When creatures began to remember light, the night became a realm of longing. The stars scattered across the firmament were fragments of reassurance, distant echoes of the sun, reminders that light had not disappeared, only withdrawn. In this way, dawn and night became mirrors of each other, presence and promise, illumination and mystery. Together, they formed the dual heartbeat of consciousness. In this equilibrium, life began to sense continuity. The repetition of dawns, unbroken across billions of days, became a silent certainty, the foundation upon which existence could build trust. Every sunrise was a reaffirmation of order within the vast uncertainty of the cosmos. For early life, it was a law of survival. For emerging consciousness, it became a symbol of meaning. Dawn told the living world that time moved forward, that death was not final, that renewal was woven into the structure of being. The rise of rhythm also brought with it the birth of sleep. To rest was to surrender to darkness with faith in the light's return. Sleep was a biological reflection of dawn's duality, an act of dying and rebirth, practiced every night. In the soft boundary between sleep and waking, the memory of the first dawn lives on. The body slows, the mind drifts, and deep within, the circadian clock keeps its silent watch, counting the hours until light returns. Dawn, in this sense, never truly leaves. It simply hides behind the eyelids of the world. And as time unfolded, the synchronization of countless lives created a harmony greater than any individual being. Forests breathed in unison with the rising sun. Coral reefs shimmered with morning activity. Entire ecosystems pulsed like a single living organism. The earth had become an instrument of light, tuned, rhythmic, and aware. Each dawn, from the hum of insects to the flight of birds, played a note in the grand composition of existence. Philosophically, this rhythm marked the beginning of time as experience. Before dawn's regularity, there was only chaos, endless fluctuation without pattern or meaning. But with the rising and setting of the sun came the first division of moments, before and after, dark and light, now and later. Life began to understand sequence. In this understanding lay the foundation of memory, prediction, and eventually, reflection. The dawn did not just illuminate the world, it created duration. In the light of the first mornings, life became temporal, aware of cycles, aware of change. The planet's great clock began to tick, not through gears or numbers, but through pulses of light. And we, the distant descendants of those first creatures, still live by its rhythm. When we wake at sunrise or grow weary at dusk, we are not merely following habit. We are participating in a cosmic inheritance billions of years old. Dawn remains the quiet conductor of all life's symphony. So when we speak of time, of days passing and years unfolding, what we truly speak of is the memory of light. Every second is a fraction of dawn's rhythm, every heartbeat a reflection of its pulse. The memory of dawn did not stop at rhythm. It deepened into awareness. With every rising sun, the world was teaching life something profound: how to notice, how to feel, how to be conscious. What began as the simple reaction of cells to light was slowly transforming into perception, and perception into thought. The dawn was not just illuminating the earth now, it was illuminating the mind. Somewhere in the soft glow of a prehistoric morning, the universe looked through the eyes of its own creation and realized, I exist. Consciousness is often imagined as something sudden, a spark, a divine moment of awakening. But in truth, it was more like the sunrise itself, gradual, gentle, inevitable. Across eons, each dawn sculpted the nervous systems of creatures who learned to interpret light, to make sense of pattern and motion. The first neurons fired in rhythm with the sun's arc, and with each new morning, those patterns became memory. Awareness grew not in leaps, but in ripples, spreading from the simplest awareness of brightness to the complex inner world of reflection. In this slow unfolding, the dawn served as the first mirror. Light revealed the form of the world, but also the awareness that one was separate from it. When a creature sensed its own shadow, when it felt light fall upon its body and recognized itself as distinct from its surroundings, the seed of self-awareness was planted. Dawn was not merely the arrival of light, it was the birth of identity. The cosmos, through life, was beginning to distinguish between the knower and the known. This was the threshold where experience began to bloom. Perception, sensation, curiosity, all were born from the dialogue between darkness and light. To sense was to participate in the world's unfolding story. Each dawn became a renewal of that dialogue, a moment when life rediscovered itself through vision, sound, and movement. Even before language, before thought, before memory had words, there was this quiet communion. The living world waking to itself through the steady revelation of light. Scientifically, consciousness may have arisen from the complexity of neural networks responding to environmental stimuli. The more intricate the web of perception became, the more nuanced the response. But beneath that biological scaffolding, something subtler was forming, an emotional intelligence born from the cycles of the planet. Dawn did not just provide light, it provided pattern. It offered reliability in an unpredictable cosmos. That reliability was the cradle of awareness. To know that light would return was to recognize stability, to feel a primitive form of trust. Trust, in its earliest form, was perhaps the first emotion. The rhythm of dawn taught life to believe in continuity. It said, "The world will not vanish, it will return." In that simple truth was the seed of comfort, of expectation, of future. Dawn became the silent teacher of consciousness, not through words, but through repetition. Light was the first memory keeper, etching the experience of existence into the neural fabric of every living thing. As brains evolved, so too did the quality of perception. The first vertebrates began to navigate not only through instinct, but through learned behavior. Memory allowed them to anticipate, to choose, to imagine possibilities before acting. The dawn became a signal not just to move, but to decide. With that, consciousness crossed another threshold, from awareness to agency. Life was no longer only reacting to the world, it was shaping it. From an evolutionary lens, this agency was revolutionary. Organisms began modifying their surroundings, building nests, choosing shelters, creating tools. The first dim glimmers of creativity appeared. And with creativity came the earliest form of imagination. In this subtle expansion of mind, dawn played a quiet role. It provided the consistent stage upon which imagination could perform. Each morning, as light returned, it offered the opportunity to begin again, to try, to adapt, to dream. The relationship between light and thought deepened further as sensory systems evolved. The brain began to use light not only for survival, but for interpretation, to make sense of beauty, pattern, and symmetry. A bird was no longer only drawn to light for warmth. It saw in the dawn's colors an aesthetic language. A human ancestor might have watched the sky shift from indigo to gold and felt something wordless, wonder, perhaps, or the first stirring of reverence. Dawn became not only the rhythm of biology, but the canvas of imagination. In many ways, consciousness was the Earth's way of witnessing its own dawn. Every living mind became a reflection of that original awakening, a continuation of the same act of seeing. Light had taught molecules to organize, cells to cooperate, and now, minds to contemplate. The story of life had become self-referential. The observer and the observed were no longer separate. The universe had opened its eyes and found itself staring back. Philosophically, this moment marked the convergence of matter and meaning. Consciousness transformed light from a physical phenomenon into a symbol, a metaphor for clarity, for truth, for being. Dawn was no longer just sunrise, it was realization. The same photons that fell upon the ocean now fell upon the mind, and something within recognized their significance. The external world and the inner world were woven together by the same radiance. This realization carried with it a strange and gentle melancholy, the awareness of contrast. For to be conscious of light is also to be conscious of darkness. Dawn, in revealing the world, also revealed its impermanence. Every sunrise implied a sunset, every awakening a return to sleep. Awareness, therefore, came hand in hand with mortality. The creatures who saw the light most clearly also began to sense its eventual absence. Consciousness was a gift, but also a burden, the knowledge that every beginning carries within it the seed of ending. And yet, even this sorrow held beauty. The fleeting nature of light gave it meaning. To know that dawn would fade made its arrival sacred. In this realization, the roots of spirituality began to take hold, the reverence for renewal, the gratitude for illumination, the quiet faith that darkness is not defeat but preparation. The dawn became a symbol not just of existence, but of transcendence. It reminded all conscious beings that light, though temporary, is eternal in essence, always returning, always reborn. Thus, in the story of the first dawn, we find the origin of mind itself, not as something apart from the world, but as its continuation. Consciousness did not emerge in the universe. It emerged as the universe, learning to see itself through the eyes of life. The sun that shines above is the same sun that glows within awareness. The daybreak outside mirrors the one unfolding in thought. To awaken is to echo that first cosmic moment when the world stepped from shadow into light and recognized its own reflection. And perhaps that is the quiet secret carried by every dawn, that consciousness is not an accident, but a remembering. Each morning when we open our eyes, we are reenacting an ancient awakening that began billions of years ago. The light that enters our pupils is the same that once touched the first living cell. To awaken is to return to the origin, to the promise, to the simple truth that to see is to exist, and to exist is to shine. There came a time when light, which had once been only a silent witness to creation, became a storyteller. Dawn had not merely awakened the earth, it had inspired it to speak. Across millions of years, as the mind of life expanded, the relationship between light and meaning deepened. No longer was the rising sun just a signal to wake or a measure of time. It became a language, one written in the colors of the sky, the patterns of migration, the movements of the stars. Dawn was now not only a biological rhythm, it was a cosmic metaphor. Humanity, standing on the edge of this long continuum, inherited more than the instincts of its ancestors. It inherited the memory of the first light. Somewhere within the architecture of human thought, the dawn still whispered, Early humans, watching the horizon brighten after long nights, felt something ancient stir within, a sense that this light was not just physical, but divine. The sun became the first deity, the first teacher, the first proof that the world could renew itself after darkness. The earliest myths were not born from imagination alone. They were born from the emotional truth of dawn. For millennia, human eyes lifted toward the morning sky in reverence. The first fires built in caves were reflections of the rising sun, attempts to mimic the eternal warmth of the day. Ancient rituals, prayers, dances, chants were all gestures of gratitude toward light. Dawn marked not only the start of the day, but the rebirth of existence. Every sunrise reminded humanity of its fragility and its fortune. To wake was to be chosen again. The act of living became sacred repetition, mirroring the rhythm of the cosmos. But beneath this reverence was also curiosity. Why did light return? What power sustained it? From this question, both religion and science would eventually grow. Dawn, the simple repetition of light after dark, became the first problem of philosophy. It suggested order in the universe, a pattern that could be trusted. To the early mind, this was evidence that the world was not chaos, that something greater, unseen yet benevolent, maintained its balance. Light implied meaning. It was the earliest glimpse of cosmos emerging from chaos. As human intellect expanded, the poetic understanding of dawn merged with inquiry. Observers began to track the movement of the sun, to map shadows, to measure the length of days. Astronomy was born from devotion, a sacred science seeking to understand the divine clockwork behind the horizon. The first calendars were acts of faith disguised as observation, designed to predict the return of light, to assure that renewal would come. Science, in its infancy, was a prayer written in numbers. Yet even as knowledge advanced, the emotional essence of dawn remained untouched. Light continued to symbolize truth, awakening, and revelation. The human psyche, molded by millions of years of sunrise, could not help but associate illumination with understanding. To see the light became the ultimate metaphor for knowledge. The external dawn and the internal dawn had become indistinguishable. One mirrored the other. When the sun rose over the world, it also rose within the human mind. Every culture, in every corner of the earth, found its own poetry in the morning. To the Egyptians, the sun was Ra, the eternal voyager who conquered darkness each night. To the Greeks, Helios rode his chariot across the heavens, bringing light and order. In the Vedic hymns of India, the dawn goddess Ushas was celebrated as the awakener of life and consciousness. In all these myths, light was not just energy, it was awareness made divine. Humanity projected its own emerging consciousness onto the sky, seeing in the sun its own reflection, powerful, creative, ephemeral. Philosophically, this was a turning point. The dawn was no longer external. It had become internalized. The light outside had given birth to the light within. Every sunrise became an allegory for human thought, ignorance dissolving into understanding, confusion giving way to clarity. The human mind began to see itself as part of this endless cycle. We are not separate from the cosmos, these myths said. We are its continuation, its eyes, its dreamers. Even as civilization grew and myths gave way to science, this sense of sacred rhythm endured. The study of the sun became more precise, from the heliocentric revelations of Copernicus to the fusion equations of the modern age. Yet the emotional truth remained the same. Light is life. We now know that the photons streaming from the sun are ancient messengers, born in the core of a star, traveling millions of years before touching our skin. Every dawn is, in a very real sense, a visit from deep time. The sunlight that greets us each morning began its journey before humanity even existed. To realize this is to feel small and infinite all at once. Dawn connects us not only to our ancestors, but to the very beginning of the universe. The light that animates us is the same that burst forth in the Big Bang, scattered through the void, condensed into stars, and now awakens the earth each morning. The first dawn, then, was not merely the sunrise of a planet. It was the cosmic inheritance of creation itself. Each new day is a repetition of that primordial moment when light first conquered darkness. Even in modern life, when we rarely look up to witness the horizon's slow transformation, something within us still responds. Our bodies adjust, our mood lifts, our thoughts sharpen as the morning brightens. We may not kneel in prayer before the sun, but we still live in obedience to its rhythm. The circadian clock that beats within every cell is a remnant of ancient reverence. Science may explain the mechanism, but the feeling, that quiet awe at dawn's return, belongs to something older than reason. And perhaps that is the lesson of the dawn story. Knowledge does not replace wonder, it deepens it. To understand the physics of light is not to lose its poetry, but to expand it. Every law of nature is an expression of the same mystery that inspired the first humans to sing to the morning. Whether we call it energy, consciousness, or grace, it is all the same radiance, the same continuity that began when the first dawn touched the silent earth. In this way, dawn is both ancient and new. It is the world's oldest truth, yet it feels freshly born each day. It reminds us that no matter how far we evolve, through science, through philosophy, through technology, we remain creatures of light, still bound to that first moment of awakening. Our thoughts may reach for the stars, but our hearts still rise with the sun. And when we stand at the edge of morning, watching the light spill over the horizon, we are witnessing more than a daily event. We are witnessing our own origin, the continuation of a story billions of years old, still unfolding in every beam, every heartbeat, every breath. The dawn, after all, is not something that happens to the world. It is something that happens through us. As the idea of light deepened through time, humanity began to understand that dawn was never just an external event. It was a reflection of the mind, a slow illumination within consciousness itself. The first dawn, which had once touched only oceans and stone, now unfolded inside the human spirit. It revealed not just a new world, but a new way of seeing. Light became understanding. Awakening became awareness. Every morning mirrored this quiet revelation, the universe remembering that it could perceive itself. Across the ancient world, civilizations gave language to this truth. The Greeks spoke of the soul's awakening as a sunrise of reason. In India, sages described enlightenment as the inner dawn, a moment when illusion fades and clarity rises. The mystics of Sufism called it the light of the heart. All shared the same vision, that light and awareness are one and the same. Dawn, whether on the horizon or within the mind, is the meeting point between mystery and knowing. Science, centuries later, would uncover its own poetry in this pattern. It found that light is both wave and particle, both movement and stillness, a paradox that echoes consciousness itself. It behaves as two things at once, refusing to be confined to a single truth. Like the human spirit, it exists in constant transformation. The photons that once warmed the first seas are the same that enter our eyes now. The same radiance that painted the sky of the primordial earth burns quietly in our thoughts. To witness dawn, then, is to glimpse this unity, the endless flow between matter and meaning, silence and speech, life and awareness. It is a reminder that every act of perception is part of that first awakening. The light did not vanish. It only learned new ways to shine. The universe, through every living being, is still opening its eyes. There comes a moment in every dawn when the light softens, holding the world between silence and awakening. In that fragile pause lies the secret of all existence, the balance between night and day, presence and absence, becoming and being. The first dawn did not banish the dark, it gave it purpose. Light and shadow became the two halves of one breath, endlessly exchanging meaning. Since that first awakening, every sunrise has carried the memory of creation. The same photons that once broke across a silent ocean now strike our eyes, completing an ancient circuit between star and soul. In every heartbeat and thought, that first radiance continues, not as an echo, but as a living rhythm. The dawn never ended. It simply changed form, flowing through every leaf, every mind, every quiet act of renewal. Perhaps this is the deepest truth of all, that the universe is not moving toward an end, but endlessly rediscovering itself. The first light never faded. It became us. To witness dawn is to witness our own continuation, the cosmos remembering what it means to awaken. And now, as the final light of this long reflection settles, we arrive where all dawns must lead, into quiet acceptance. The story of the first dawn is not just the story of how light touched matter. It is the story of how awareness touched itself. Everything that has unfolded since, the shaping of oceans, the birth of stars, the flicker of thought, has been a continuation of that same awakening. The cosmos did not simply begin, it began remembering. And in that remembrance, everything found its place: the stone, the seed, the eye, the mind. All are vessels for the same light that once broke across the newborn earth. Perhaps that is why the human heart responds so deeply to sunrise. It is not nostalgia for a morning long gone, but recognition, a faint memory of our own beginning. Somewhere deep within us, the first dawn still burns, not as fire, but as knowing. When we stand beneath a pale sky and feel the warmth rise over the horizon, we are not witnesses to a distant event. We are participants in it. Every cell, every thought, every breath is part of the same unfolding that began when the first light pierced the dark. As the world brightens and sound slowly returns, we are reminded that awakening is never a singular act. It is continuous, rhythmic, eternal. Even sleep, even silence, are not the absence of light. They are its preparation. The darkness that once seemed empty is revealed to be full, nurturing, necessary. It is the quiet soil from which all dawns grow. To live is to move through this rhythm again and again, each cycle another opportunity to see, to feel, to understand a little more. And so, the story ends not with a conclusion, but with a continuation. The light you see in the morning sky is older than memory, older than time, yet it falls upon you as if it were new. That is the secret of a dawn. It is both ancient and immediate, distant and personal. It tells us that everything which begins will begin again, that nothing truly ends, and that every darkness carries its own promise of illumination. If you listen closely now, you might feel it, the slow, patient pulse of the cosmos still awakening through you. The first dawn is not behind us. It is within us, unfolding quietly, endlessly, through every act of awareness. And as this reflection fades into silence, one truth remains. The universe is still opening its eyes.